Welcome, welcome, welcome to yet another Wednesday of this live Q&A on healing and transforming fatigue. And today I'm going to talk about what is fatigue and how do I know if that's what I have. So there are many different definitions of fatigue. The main one that I use is that it is a debilitating tiredness that doesn't go away when you sleep or rest, and that affects all areas of your life. And it interferes with everything. It interferes with all your activities, and it is not being sleepy. It is not like, oh, I'm so tired because I worked so much, or there's been a lot going on. No, this is something different. It's on another level. And for me, it took a while to understand what it was that I was going through. Burnout is something that is more widely spread and people talk more of. And to me, that was like, sure, yeah, I get it, that I have all the symptoms and everything. But at the same time, every time I tried to exercise, I just got worse. So what I'm going to share today is the different diagnoses of fatigue and some of the symptoms of them. And this is by no means, and I don't have an intention to cover everything. And they're not the only diagnoses that there are related to fatigue, but I'm just going to share the most common ones. Just fix that, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to start with ME, which is short for myalgic encephalomyelitis, also known as chronic fatigue. And there are many different symptoms for this. It is the kind of fatigue that doesn't disappear regardless of how much you rest. It often gets worse when you do physical activities or intense mental activities. There is very often brain fog, and that means that I remember I used to think of it as like I had porridge in my brain. Everything was just so slow. There is often very high sensitivity towards sounds and light. So I would, for instance, wear like not the noise canceling things, but to clear out sounds when my kids were at home, because I had a problem with their voices. It was like, it was so sharp in my ears. And going outside, sunglasses was a must regardless of weather. Heart palpitations is also very common. Sleep problems, trouble falling asleep, waking up often, waking up in the mornings not feeling rested, or being tired and wanting to sleep all the time. Dizziness when standing up. Flu symptoms, ache in the joints or the muscles. And there are more symptoms, but this is like the main part of it. So how does this differ from burnout? So burnout is feeling tired and depleted. And there's also brain fog and difficulties concentrating. There's also sleep problems. But on top of that, there's also things that can also be with chronic fatigue, but are sometimes more prevalent in the acute phase of burnout, which is depression, anxiety, mood swings, feeling disengaged, like you don't care what happens. And the difference is that there's a tiredness that can be relieved with resting. And also by exercising, by activating your body in a way that feels good for the system. And this is very often consequence of a long-term stress or like a shorter-term overload. Then we have post-COVID or long COVID, which is very similar to chronic fatigue. And they say that some of the people that had this diagnosis, it's the same thing as chronic fatigue. The difference is that there are a few things that are part of post-COVID and long COVID that aren't part in chronic fatigue. And one of them is that the sense of smell and the sense of taste can be affected. And that there's also often fever, headaches, changes in menstrual, that it's affecting the menstrual cycles, depression, and that the symptoms start after a COVID infection. And then we have severe stress. The symptoms of severe stress are similar to burnout. It's a type of fatigue that is similar to burnout, but it's often related to a very specific stressful situation and not so much long-term in that sense. And it is often relieved when the stressor is removed. For instance, if you are at work and you just have too much to do at work, and you start having all these symptoms, you start having anxiety, you feel really tired, anxious, and then the workload is changed and you all of a sudden feel like, okay, this is manageable, and then the symptoms disappear. That's when we call it severe stress. There's another diagnosis for fatigue, which is mild PTSD. Now, PTSD is directly related to a traumatic either event or a situation. And there are often flashbacks, trouble falling asleep, trouble sleeping, because you might wake up at night and have flashbacks from the situation. Mood swings, avoidance, which means that you avoid certain places or certain situations because they trigger the trauma. And the reason why I say mild PTSD, because there are different gradients of PTSD. And I'm not going to go into the other parts of PTSD. And then there are many other situations that also cause fatigue, like for example, a stroke or a head injury. And it's a very interesting thing there because all of a sudden when you have a stroke or a head injury, there is a very palpable physical occurrence that changes what happens in the brain and in the head. But the symptoms are very similar to chronic fatigue. I remember in the beginning, when I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue, I was trying to understand what is it that's going on with me. And I remember reading about someone talking about stress-related brain injury. And that made a lot of sense to me because that's exactly what it felt like. I had experienced stress for a really, really long time, not always aware of it. And all the symptoms were that of having a brain injury. There are other inflammatory diseases that cause fatigue. Medication can cause fatigue. Depression causes fatigue. Heavy menstruation. If you bleed a lot, then your iron levels will become lower, and that can cause fatigue. And there are other diagnoses, like for instance, thyroid imbalance, multiple sclerosis, sleep apnea, and more. And there are also lifestyle factors like consumption of alcohol, eating, maybe if your diet is unbalanced and you're not getting the nutrients that you need, that can cause fatigue. Lack of physical activity can also cause fatigue. So how do you know if this is something that you have or if you have some of these diagnoses? The only way to find out is, one, to see how many of these symptoms do I have and how debilitating in my life it is. And then talking to a medical professional, because they're the only ones that can give you a specific diagnosis. So I hope this was helpful to you. I know there was a lot of talking around this, and I'm gonna add a post around this where you can read a lot of the things that I have said today, if that's easier for you. And the next time I'm going to talk about treatments, specifically for chronic fatigue, burnout, stress, severe stress, and mild PTSD. And also talk about what the latest research is saying about this. So join me next week if you're curious about that. And if you speak Swedish, on the 18th of September, I will be having a talk on Zoom around my personal journey and sharing more tools on how to heal chronic fatigue and other forms of fatigue. And there also will be an opportunity to ask questions. So if you're interested in that and you speak Swedish, head on over to the link in my bio and you can sign up there. Okay, take really good care of yourself. And I also want you to know that if you resonate with any of all the things that I've talked about today, that you're not alone. It is a lonely journey to be struggling with fatigue and to be on the healing journey of fatigue. So if you need support, please reach out and take good care of yourself. Sending you lots of love.